Okay, so I wanted to say today something about history and the problems that we face, and we heard in the last presentation something about the importance of history, and also the fact that very often the history of Africans and the African diaspora is a hidden history, hidden by, we could say, the powers that be. And I wanted to give my presentation today to address not only that problem of hidden history, but also of disinformation and Eurocentrism. Eurocentrism being one of the, we can say, one of the aspects of racism, and one of the manifestations of racism, which only presents things through a Eurocentric lens, which tries to distort our understanding of the world. So, for history, it's important not only that we have an accurate understanding of the world, but also that we have historians. And you can see that I've used this well-known African proverb to illustrate what I want to try and say. So I thought I'd start off with a famous person of German connection. So this was the view of Hegel in the 19th century. It's a view which has been repeated. I don't know whether I need to read it for the translators or whether everybody can read that amount of English. I don't really want to say too much about Hegel. If we move on 130 years, we see a similar view from an eminent British historian who said very similar things. And just to show that I'm not discriminating against the British or the Germans, I'm going to include the French as well. I haven't got long enough to include all the nations of, all the representatives of Europe and North America, but just 3 of them. So the point here is that for centuries, there has been a narrative which denies, in fact, that Africa and Africans have any history, which denies the agency of Africans as human beings. And one of the important things about history is that it provides us not only with a sense of identity, but it's also related to the question of memory, but more importantly even than that is the question of our understanding of the world. So if we are given a distorted picture of history, or the idea that some people have no history, whether that's Africans or women or whoever it might be, it has an impact on how our understanding of our place in the world, our role in the world, our ability to make a change in the world. And this is one of the main reasons why these racist views are continue to be promoted. They have and you can all think of more examples. It has a particularly important impact on young people being educated in schools in a Eurocentric manner. Now, that is to say, I'm not just talking about young African people, but all people. Again, it distorts their understanding of the world, both the past and the present. And so, throughout the history of the struggle of Africans and the Pan-African movement, we can see that those who have been concerned about the progress of African people internationally have taken a stand in defense of history and demanded that history is given appropriate importance, both from the point of view of opposing disinformation, opposing Eurocentrism, but also from the point of view of researching and presenting an accurate history of Africa and Africans. In other words, combating racism and Eurocentrism in this way. So this one from Cabral is not directly a quotation relating to history as such, in the way that we normally understand history, but it's about, you could say, experience and the experience of political struggle. And the important thing about history is that history is also or part of history is the summation of experience. In other words, we're engaged in trying to change the world. Okay, what is the summation of our experience of trying to do that since the last Congress was held in Munich? So unless we have that summation, we don't have any guide, we don't have any theory. So theory comes from the summation of experience. So if we don't sum up our experience, we have nothing to guide us in the future, or we don't learn the lessons of the past. So that's also an aspect of history. And in that summation, as well as in our everyday activities, it's important that, as Cabral says, we not only expose lies and disinformation, but we have an accurate summation of our history, both the victories and the defeats. Okay, so another important aspect is highlighted here by Angela Davis. It's essential to resist the depiction of history as the work of heroic individuals in order for people today to recognize their potential agency as part of an ever-expanding community of struggle. So this is another consideration when we're thinking about history. We often have a tendency to only talk about individuals, whether they're heroes or heroines. And of course, there is a place to talk about individuals. But we understand the importance of individuals as part of a wider collective. So, although we give thanks to Modupe, we know that she's part of a team, a collective. So, although she may be a heroine, there are others who support her. Or a Shiro, she's part of it, and so on. So, the point is that our heroes and heroines, or heroes and Shiros, come out of a collective struggle, a collective that's doing something. So it's important not to see them in isolation from. So in other words, if there's no... Anyway, the point is, if there's no struggle, there are no heroes or Shiros. So that's important. So even in this struggle to organize this Congress, then that people emerge from that. Anyway, that's the point. So it's important that we consider people in general. Okay, so then I thought I'd give some examples. So I chose the national hero of Germany first. And usually when I come to Germany, I talk about this young man, and people say, "Who is that?" Which always troubles me, because I assume that everybody knows. Does everybody here know who this is? Well, you see, maybe I should just sit down and rest my case. So here we have the importance of history. So this is your history. It's my history too, but it's closer to you. But you don't know anything about this young man who's a national... I have declared him national hero of Germany. unlike some, I haven't written a letter to the Chancellor about it. Anyway, if you don't know who he is, then you need to find out. I'm not going to tell you your own history. Okay, then there could be, no, because you learn by finding out. You don't learn by being told things. If I tell you by the time you get home, you'll have forgotten.
That's the professor.
So then there are others that we should know about. I didn't just want to speak of those who have some connection with Germany. So we have others who have some connection with France, as well as Africa, as well as internationally important. You know who this is? Good. Okay, fine. 2 people do. That's a start. So these are important people in our history. This picture is taken from 1927. It's a picture from Brussels. And it's the founding Congress of the League Against Imperialism. You heard of that? Yes. Okay, good. And you see at the center of this picture is Lamine Senghor. Lamine Senghor was a communist, revolutionary activist for the Communist Party of France, also a Pan-Africanist, the organizer of the Comité de la Défense de la Race Nègre in Paris and in France, anyway, a key figure, unfortunately died at an early age, and a key figure in the founding of this Congress. So those of you who don't know anything about Lamine Senghor, then you should find something. Then we have others. So here we have another key, we can say, Pan-Africanist figure, communist, from Trinidad. In fact, an activist in Trinidad, actually not born in Trinidad, Elmer Francois. So anyway, it's important that in our history, we are also concerned about, of course, as I said, not just individuals, but key figures who were part of bigger movements. And all these people that I'm showing to you, they have their significance, but they were part of important political movements for change earlier in the 20th century. Elmer Francois is actually a national heroine, not Shiro, of Trinidad and Tobago. In fact, in the 1930s, she was charged by the colonial authorities for sedition, which meant that she was doing very good and important work at that time. And then we have 2 other important figures who, as I was discussing with Jessica and Mitchell yesterday. Yeah, I was looking to see if Jessica was here, but she doesn't seem to be here. So she's here, okay. I couldn't see her, she's hiding somewhere. Thank you. Yeah, so here we have 2 important figures who are communists, of course. But also we can say Pan-Africanists, and their activity spans many continents and countries, from Suriname and Guyana to the United States, to Russia, to Jamaica, to Amsterdam, Brussels, Hamburg, London, South Africa. Where else? Where have I left out? Anyway, so it's an international history. You're familiar with them? No. Okay. So anyway, this is what I was saying in my introduction about hidden history. So we have to consider what it is we know, what it is we've been told, why we know what we know, why we've been told what we've been told, why we haven't been told some things, why we don't know some things, and how that has an impact on our consciousness, our thinking, the way we look at the world. So anyway, if you don't know who these guys are, then again, maybe you can investigate. You can go and talk to Mitchell and Jessica, and they'll tell you all about them. But anyway, they're important. So this is a history. Those of us who consider that we're political people, we should know something about this history and its significance. And the fact that it's hidden from us is a problem. And one of the problems that we have to find a way of overcoming. Okay, so in Britain, we have a particular history of disinformation and various types of history being hidden from us. And today in particular, I'm going to talk about the history of Africa and the African diaspora. That this is a history which is, generally speaking, not very much taught in universities. It is taught to some extent, and certainly not taught very much in schools. And that in itself creates many problems. One of the problems is that young people grow up without ever seeing anything about anybody who looks anything like them, and being presented with this view of the world in which they don't figure at all. So many of us have had this experience. When I was at school, I didn't learn anything about Africa or hear anything about Africa or Africans. I had to find out for myself. And now, I was at school a long time ago. But the same thing is being perpetuated today. And it creates big problems in terms of people's self-identity, self-confidence, and so on and so forth. It also has wider consequences. And what we found in Britain was that amongst young people of African or Caribbean heritage, very, very few people studied history at university. And as I'm a professor of history at university, I have to be concerned about that. We also found that in schools, there are very few black teachers of history. In fact, there was a headline 3 years ago that only 3 people of African or Caribbean heritage were being trained to teach history in that particular year. Now, if you consider there's something like 16,000 plus history teachers in Britain, but of those 16,000, only about 250 of African or Caribbean heritage. So young people go to school, they don't learn about anything connected with them or their families. They're not taught by anyone who looks like them or their families in regard to this subject. Of course, there are problems with other subjects, but particularly in relation to this subject. Now, this is particularly important because if you go to any African or Caribbean community in Britain, you will find that everybody is talking about history. That there are all kinds of projects and meetings and people are investigating all kinds of things. So in other words, at community level, history is very, very popular. At school and at university, it's very unpopular amongst people of African and Caribbean heritage. In fact, we found that at universities, amongst young black people in Britain, history is the 3rd most unpopular subject. There are only 2 subjects that are more unpopular than history. One is agriculture, and the other is veterinary science. So this is a problem, which we decided to try and address. because, of course, it's easy to identify problems, but then the question is who's going to try and solve them. So we started an initiative called History Matters in 2014, a small group of teachers, students, postgraduate history students, and one or two academic historians. I should point out that in Britain, because not very many young people study history or go on to university to study history, there are very few people who study history at postgraduate level, and therefore there are very few academic historians. In fact, there are only, I'd say maybe 4, something like that, maybe 5. And in fact, of those 5, most of them are not trained in Britain, they come from somewhere else. So we decided to start this initiative called History Matters to try and address this problem and take some measures to deal with it. And here you can see a picture of the conference that we organized in 2015. So I should explain that at that conference, the majority of speakers were students. We had school students, we had undergraduate students, we had postgraduate students, we had teachers. So in fact, nearly everybody who spoke was of African or Caribbean heritage, and as you saw from the audience, a kind of similar demographic. So the idea was to discuss what could be done. And we tried to involve, various bodies, organizations, including those who should have a responsibility for education. And generally speaking, they weren't interested in doing anything to address the problem. So at the conference, we discussed what solutions we ourselves could develop. And in the remainder of the time I have, I just wanted to talk about some of these initiatives that came out of the conference. Well, the first one is, in fact, another conference. And that conference will take place in October this year, as you'll see, in London. It will be a conference, again, mainly of young black historians who, as I've already said, are underrepresented and generally don't have a opportunity to showcase their research, their work. And we have, I think at that conference we'll have about 13 young historians, mainly British. We do have one person from the US and one woman from North Africa, but generally people of African and Caribbean heritage in Britain speaking. And the aim of this conference is both to, as I say, give a platform for these young historians, but also to discuss how their research can be incorporated into the existing school curriculum. So we will have teachers there as well, and we'll have a discussion about how that work can be developed. Then the second thing is that we set up a Young Historians Project. One of the proposals at the conference was that we need to attract more young people. So on the left, you can see some of the young historians. You'll see in the middle Alima, who was one of those who spoke at the conference. At that time, she'd just finished her degree. So in fact, we have a group. In the course of the 2 years that the project has been active, we've had probably about 20, maybe more, slightly more young people, but we have a stable group of about 14 now. 13 of them actually are young women. We only have one young man. I'm not quite sure why that is. Not that there's anything wrong with a group of mainly young women. And they chose their own project. they're making a film. The film is in its final edit now, and an exhibition, and you'll see on the right-hand side here the launch of that also will be in October. So this will be an ongoing project. It has got some funding from what we call the Heritage Lottery Fund in Britain, which is kind of public money for history, heritage projects. So anyway, they decided they wanted to do something about actually, they wanted to do something about the Black Panthers. We had, in the 1960s, we had a Black Panther organization in Britain. We decided that we wouldn't do that because there has been some work and an exhibition on it. So we chose another organization from that period called the Black Liberation Front. And so they interviewed some of the former members of the Black Liberation Front. They found old newspapers, they found, anyway, all kinds of things. I can't go into telling you the history of that organization. You have to come to the launch, because it's too long to go into. But it was, anyway, it was an organization that was around for about 20 years, from the 1970s to the 1990s. And of course, it was a history that as young people, they knew nothing about. It was ancient history to them. But they've managed to find out so much information. So that's the second initiative. And then the third is we have a Young Filmmakers Award for schools. This is for all schools and any students. They had to make a short 5-minute film about any aspect of what we call Black British history. As I say, it's open to all students, but we hope that particularly young Black students would enter, which was more or less what happened. And then the last initiative that we have was to set up a new master's program in history. So one of the problems we have is that people are not being trained as historians, and so therefore there's not as much research as we would like on the history of Africans in Britain, for example. So we decided to set up a program which could assist in encouraging more people to come and get training as historians. And this is the master's program that we set up. It is, I should point out, in case you're not reading it, it's an online, thank you. Yeah, it's going to be a completely online program. And therefore, it's open to the whole world. If there are people here in Munich who want to register for a master's in the history of Africa and the African diaspora, you can register. If you want to apply, you're welcome. I should explain that it's a master's by research. There'll be 2 taught courses, but the rest is a research project. So if you wanted to study the African diaspora in Germany and do some research, that's fine. We can organize that. Anyway, if you're interested, I have this flyer here. People can come and get more information, or you can talk to me about it. So this is just what I wanted to share with you. To us, it's very important that not only that we reclaim our history, but that we have historians. You could say that, as you saw in the film about South Africa, somebody said to the filmmaker, we should be presenting this. Why are you presenting it? And to some extent, we could say the same about history, that we need young, or even not so young, African people to be historians, to present history, to write about history in whatever way is possible. For all those reasons that I mentioned at the beginning of my presentation, that history matters. How we understand the world, how we look at the world, what we remember, what our memory, our collective memory is extremely important. So, that's...
Applaus bitte.